I was 22 years old and invisible. At Meridian Communications, one of Chicago's most prestigious advertising agencies, I was a junior marketing intern whose days blurred together in a haze of photocopies, supply closets, and silent lunches at my desk. I was the kind of person who took the stairs instead of the elevator just to avoid small talk. It hadn't always been like that. In high school, I'd been confident and outgoing, but college had chipped away at my self-esteem, one small rejection at a time. By the time I graduated with my communications degree, I felt like a shadow of my former self. This internship at Meridian was supposed to be a fresh start, yet somehow it had become just another place where I blended into the background. The only thing that gave my life meaning was my little brother Danny. He was 8 years old, bright-eyed, and deaf from birth. While our parents struggled to pick up even the basics of sign language, I threw myself into it, with a passion that surprised even me. I spent hours at community classes and online tutorials, mastering American Sign Language until it felt as natural as breathing. It was the one skill I possessed that made me proud, though it seemed useless in the corporate world of marketing campaigns and client presentations. Knowing ASL felt like being able to play the violin in a world that only valued electric guitars, beautiful but irrelevant. It was a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of morning where Meridian buzzed with controlled chaos. We were preparing for a major client presentation, and everyone was rushing around with an air of focused panic. My supervisor, Margaret, had stationed me at the reception area to help organize materials. That's when I noticed him, an elderly man perhaps in his 70s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit and carrying himself with quiet dignity. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Yet there was something in his eyes, a mix of frustration and sadness that made my heart ache. He stood at the reception desk trying to communicate with Jessica, our usually cheerful receptionist, who now looked frazzled under the morning pressure. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. Do you have an appointment? Can you write down who you're here to see?" she asked, exasperated. The man gestured toward the elevators, his mouth forming words she couldn't catch. And then I saw it, the subtle hand movements, the facial expressions, the finger spelling. He was signing. Jessica, absorbed in her next visitor, turned away, effectively dismissing him. He stood there, shoulders slumping, looking lost. People streamed past, executives, creative directors, junior associates, late for meetings, and no one stopped. No one seemed to notice that this dignified man needed help. My first instinct was to stay put. I was just an intern. Margaret had been clear that my job was to support the presentation prep, not get involved in reception duties. But as I watched him, I thought about Danny, about how it felt when people ignored him, when they looked through him as though his deafness made him invisible. Before I could second-guess myself, I walked over, heart pounding. The man looked up with weary eyes, clearly expecting yet another dismissal. I took a breath and signed. "Hello, my name is Catherine. Can I help you?" The transformation in his face was instant. Surprise, relief, and then a genuine smile, the first I'd seen since he entered the building. "You sign?" he responded with the graceful hands of someone fluent in ASL. Thank goodness. I was beginning to think no one here would understand me. "I'm so sorry you've been having trouble," I signed back. "What can I help you with?" "I'm here to see my son," he explained. "I don't have an appointment." The young woman at the desk seemed very busy. "What's your son's name?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment, pride and uncertainty flickering across his face. "Michael Hartwell," he signed finally. My heart nearly stopped. Michael Hartwell, the CEO of Meridian Communications. His name was on the building directory. His corner office spanned the entire top floor. His rare appearances in the common areas caused ripples of nervous energy. "Mr. Hartwell is your son?" I asked, trying to keep my surprise from showing. "Yes," he confirmed. I was in the neighborhood and thought perhaps I could see him for a few minutes. I could see the vulnerability in his expression. This was a father who wanted to see his son, but didn't feel entirely welcome in his own son's workplace. Of course I signed. Let me see what I can do. Would you like to sit while I make some calls? I guided him to the seating area, making sure he could see me clearly so we could keep communicating. Then came my first real challenge. How does a lowly intern arrange a meeting between a visitor and the CEO? I called Mr. Hartwell's executive assistant Patricia, who guarded access to him like a dragon protecting treasure. Mr. Hartwell's office. This is Patricia. Hi, Patricia. This is Catherine Walsh from the intern program. I have a visitor here who says he's Mr. Hartwell's father. He'd like to see him if possible. There was a long pause. His father. Yes, ma'am. An elderly gentleman, very well dressed. He's been waiting in the lobby. Another pause. I'll need to check with Mr. Hartwell. Can you have the visitor wait? Of course. Thank you. I hung up and returned to Mr. Hartwell Robert as he'd introduced himself to let him know we were working on arranging the meeting. As we waited, we signed, and I discovered that Robert Hartwell was one of the most interesting people I'd ever met. He told me about his career as an architect, how several of the buildings that now defined the Chicago skyline had begun as sketches on his desk. He spoke of his late wife Michael's mother, who had taught at the Illinois School for the Deaf, and who had instilled in both of them the value of education and compassion. He explained the challenges of raising a hearing son as a deaf parent, how proud he was of Michael's success, and how distance had grown between them as the years passed. He's always been driven. Robert signed his expression caught between admiration and worry. Even as a child, he wanted to prove himself to show the world that having a deaf father didn't hold him back. I just hope he hasn't forgotten how to slow down, how to simply live. I listened captivated. Talking with him felt effortless. For once, I wasn't the invisible intern. I was simply someone who could understand someone who could bridge a gap. As the minutes slipped into nearly half an hour, Patricia called back. She explained that Mr. Hartwell was in back-to-back meetings and wouldn't be available for at least another hour. I watched the disappointment flicker across Robert's face, though he tried to mask it. Perhaps I should come back another time, he signed softly. I don't want to be a bother. You're not a bother, I reassured him. Would you like to wait a little longer? I could show you around the building. His face brightened immediately. I'd love that. I haven't seen where Michael works. And so began what would later be called the most unauthorized building tour in Meridian's history. I should have been updating spreadsheets or preparing binders, but instead I spent 2 hours guiding Robert through his son's company. We started in the creative department, where I explained the design process and introduced him to a few of the team members. Some gave polite, hurried greetings, but others lit up when they realized who he was. When I mentioned he had been an architect, their interest grew, and soon I was translating lively exchanges about design principles and architecture. Robert was fascinated. His eyes scanned posters, sketches, and mood boards, as if he were absorbing his son's world for the first time. In the account management department, he listened intently as I signed explanations about client strategies. In the break room, he chuckled while reminiscing about the coffee shops he had once frequented as a younger man. Everywhere we went, I translated bridging conversations that otherwise would never have existed. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Margaret. Where are you? I need those files. This is unacceptable. Guilt tugged at me, but each time I looked at Robert's face lit up with joy and curiosity. I couldn't bring myself to end the tour. At one point, as we passed through the marketing analytics floor, I noticed a figure standing on the mezzanine above us. Michael Hartwell himself. Tall, composed, and partially hidden behind a pillar, he was watching. Watching his father, watching me. I couldn't read his expression, but something about his stillness made me think he had been there for a while. My stomach knotted. The CEO had just caught me giving his father an unsanctioned tour. I braced myself for termination. But when I glanced back a moment later, he was gone. We continued through the building, even stepping into the executive floor with its polished wood paneling and carefully curated artwork. Robert's eyes softened as he looked around. Michael built all of this, he signed with pride. He did, I answered. Everyone here respects him deeply. I'm proud of him, Robert signed slowly. I just wish I knew him better as an adult. When he was young, we were close. But after his mother died, he seemed to feel he had to take care of everything himself. He stopped asking for help. Stopped sharing. I think he believed my deafness made me fragile. My chest tightened. I thought of Danny, of how children often carry burdens, silently protecting the very people who want most to be part of their lives. By the time we returned to the lobby, nearly 3 hours had passed. Robert looked content, but resigned. Thank you, Catherine. He signed, his hands steady with gratitude. This has been wonderful. I feel like I understand Michael's world so much better now. And you remind me of my wife. She had the same kind heart. His words moved me deeply. Yet even as I signed back, it's been my pleasure. I noticed Margaret striding across the lobby toward me. Her face was a storm of controlled fury. Catherine, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the air. I need to speak with you. Now. I turned to Robert to explain, but before I could move my hands, another voice intervened. Calm, authoritative, unmistakable. Actually, Margaret, the voice said, I need to speak with Miss Walsh first. I spun around. Standing just a few feet away was Michael Hartwell himself, the CEO. Tall, composed, his eyes fixed not on Margaret, but directly on me. Michael's presence seemed to slow the entire lobby. Conversations hushed. Phones stopped ringing. Even Margaret, who was mid-stride and mid-sentence, faltered. He wore no tie, his jacket slung casually over one arm, but the authority he carried was unmistakable. Miss Walsh, he said again, voice even but unreadable. A word. My heart pounded. Of course, I murmured, turning to Robert. I started to sign an apology, but Michael beat me to it. His hands moved slightly awkward but clear, forming signs I hadn't expected him to know. Dad, good to see you. Robert blinked, startled. Michael, he signed back, his movements hesitant, as if he didn't quite believe his son was speaking his language. I'm sorry I kept you waiting. Michael signed, his expression softening. Meetings ran long. Thank you for coming. For a heartbeat, Robert's face shifted, surprise, then relief, then pride, flickering all at once. His hands trembled slightly as he replied, I just wanted to see where you work. It's impressive? Michael's mouth curved faintly. Come upstairs with me. We can talk in my office. He glanced at me, then his gaze steady. Catherine, please join us. Margaret inhaled sharply, clearly about to protest, but Michael turned his head slightly and said, Cancel my next meeting. This takes priority. It wasn't a request. Margaret bit back whatever she'd been about to say and vanished toward the elevator's heels, clicking like gunfire. I followed father and son to the executive elevator, nerves prickling. Inside the mirrored box, the three of us stood in silence. Michael's reflection stared back at me, tall, composed, but not as impenetrable as I'd once thought. Robert was watching his son's hands, as if memorizing every movement. When the doors opened onto the top floor, Michael led us into an office that was less an office than a sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city sketches pinned neatly to corkboards, a model of an upcoming project on the coffee table. Please, Michael said, gesturing to the leather chairs by the window. Sit. We did. He took the chair opposite, leaning forward slightly. I've been watching for the last hour, he said to me. The tour, the introductions. My father looked happier than I've seen him in years. That was your doing. I opened my mouth to explain, apologize even, but he raised a hand. You don't need to justify it. I should have been the one showing him around. Instead, I hid in meetings. His eyes flicked to Robert, softer now. I didn't even know you were coming until Patricia told me. Robert shifted, his hands moving slowly. I didn't want to be a burden, he signed. You're not. Michael replied immediately, also signing. His movements were clumsy but earnest. He stopped, exhaled, switched back to speech. I didn't know how to fit you into this world. I built all of this to prove something, but somewhere along the way, I stopped sharing it with you. Robert's eyes shone. He reached across the space between them, his large hand covering his son's. "You've done well," he signed. "Your mother would be proud." Michael swallowed hard. "I wish she were here," he said aloud. Silence settled over the office, heavy but not uncomfortable. The city buzzed beyond the glass, but in that room it felt as if time had slowed. Finally, Michael turned back to me. "You speak ASL fluently." "Yes," I said quietly. "My little brother's deaf. I grew up signing." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "That explains a lot." "I didn't mean to overstep," I added. Robert was waiting so long, and it just seemed wrong for him to sit there alone. "You didn't overstep." Michael leaned back, studying me. "You did what no one else here would have thought to do. You made him feel welcome." Robert chuckled softly, signing, "She's very good." Michael smiled at his father's words, then looked back at me. "You've worked here." "What, 2 months?" 7 weeks, I said. "You're an intern," he murmured, as if weighing something. "And yet you've done more for my father today than I've managed in years." I felt my cheeks warm. "He's easy to like," I said. Robert's eyes crinkled with amusement, but Michael's expression had shifted into something thoughtful, almost decisive. "Catherine," he said finally, "how would you feel about working directly with me?" The words hung in the air, unreal. "Sir, as a liaison," he clarified, "between me and clients who use ASL, between me and my father, between worlds." I blinked. "You don't have to answer now," he added quickly. "Think about it. But know this, I'm grateful. What you did today?" He broke off, looking at his father again. "I don't say this often, but thank you." Robert squeezed my hand, then his rough palm warm. "You've given me a gift," he signed. My throat tightened. It was nothing, I signed back. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything, the kind of small act that shifted the ground under your feet. For a moment, none of us spoke. The city stretched out beyond the windows, steel and glass glinting in the late afternoon sun. Michael stood, walked to the window, and placed a hand on the glass, as if feeling the hum of the streets below. "My mother always said buildings are stories," he said quietly, half to himself. "They hold the people who create them. They hold the lives that move through them. I built this one thinking it would prove something. But now..." He turned back, his expression no longer the polished CEO, but simply a son. "Now I see I've been missing the story that matters most." Robert rose too slowly. He crossed to stand beside his son at the window. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. Then Robert's hands moved, halting but sure. "I am proud of you. But I miss you." Michael blinked hard, his jaw tight. He signed back clumsily but with intent, "I miss you too." It was awkward, beautiful, and impossibly tender. Without thinking, I stepped a little closer, ready to translate if needed, but they kept signing to each other, words stumbling out of their hands, unpolished but real. "I wanted you to see where I work," Michael signed. "I wanted to see you?" Robert answered. Michael's shoulders dropped and he reached for his father's arm. Robert clasped it with a grip that said everything language couldn't. I turned away, blinking fast, giving them a moment that belonged only to them. The skyline blurred behind my eyes. When I glanced back, Michael was watching me. "Catherine," he said softly, "would you give us a few minutes? Patricia will bring you some paperwork." I nodded, my throat tight. "Of course." I slipped out of the office, letting the door click shut behind me. In the corridor, everything felt brighter, somehow airier, as if the building itself had exhaled. I walked toward the reception area where Margaret was waiting, arms folded, her expression clipped. But when she opened her mouth to speak, I simply smiled. For once, I didn't feel small under her gaze. "Mr. Hartwell will be in touch," I said gently. "I'll wait for his instructions." She blinked, thrown off balance, and said nothing. A few minutes later, Patricia appeared with a folder and an apologetic smile. "Mr. Hartwell asked me to give you this," she said. "It's a preliminary contract for a liaison position. He said you're under no obligation, but he hopes you'll consider it." I stared at the folder, pulse quickening. When I looked back through the glass wall, I saw father and son still at the window, heads bent together, signing slowly, talking, laughing. I pressed the folder to my chest. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of tea, the folder spread open before me. Danny sat across from me doing his homework. His hearing aids rested on the table. He always took them out after a long day at school. "How was work?" he asked, his voice soft but practiced eyes flicking between my hands and my lips. I smiled and signed back different. He grinned. "Good different or bad different?" "Good," I signed. "Very good." He tilted his head at the papers on the table. "New job," maybe I said aloud. "Are you going to take it?" I looked at him, the brother who had taught me patience, who had taught me to listen with my eyes, who had made me bilingual in a language of hands and heart. "I think so," I said quietly. Danny smiled and bent over his notebook again. I sat there a while longer, tracing my fingers over the lines of the contract. Beyond the window, the city pulsed with light. Somewhere across town, a father and a son were learning to speak to each other again. And I, an intern who'd just wanted to do the right thing, was suddenly standing at the edge of a new life, a new story.